All right, here we go. It's the System Failure Podcast, number 46. How's it going, Nate?
Hey, Brian, number 46. Very exciting. Well, I guess my mind is reeling once again. I don't know if our listeners will be familiar with the Diary of the CEO podcast, but it's hosted by this man, Stephen Bartlett. He's like British, but he has like I think one of his parents was African, so he moved to the UK when he was like 2. But he has this podcast, and he had on one of these dissident doctors who is now ringing the alarm bells about the potential negative side effects of the COVID jab from a couple of years ago. This guy's named Dr. Aseem Malholtra, and he's a cardiologist and one of these big muckety mucks in the UK medical scene. And he cites all these studies that show that an increased risk of cardiac events for those who got the COVID jab versus those who are unvaccinated. I guess the hypothesis here is that something about the mRNA jab specifically causes inflammation of the heart muscle, and then so that puts you at a greater risk of cardiac events, getting the jab versus those who are unvaccinated. And his final conclusion here is, just to be as brief as possible, his final conclusion here is that maybe there would be some rationale in the data for those who are high risk, maybe if you're really old or if you happen to be overweight or obese, maybe folks like that, for the waves preceding the Omicron wave, could have seen like the risk of increased cardiac events outweighs the decreased risk of COVID, of COVID, being hospitalized for COVID. And so maybe there'd be some rationale for that, but that the pharmaceutical industry broadly has been very dishonest about the efficacy of their medications. They cherry pick data and then get that data published because they have tons of money to throw around. He also had this notion. He thinks that the third leading cause of death worldwide is medications. The point he's trying to make is that medications are trade-offs. They've got side effects and they've got benefits, and that we are lauding the benefits and we are ignoring or minimizing the side effects because this makes a lot of money for a lot of people. And that's the alarm bell he's ringing. And it's every time I see one of these doctors making the rounds on the pod, like Dr. Pierre Corey or Dr. Robert Malone, these guys with impeccable credentials, breaking ranks with the establishment, it really sends a chill down the old spine. This guy Malhotra, he said he was on the British TV broadcast promoting the COVID vax at the beginning until his old man died abruptly at age 73 of a cardiac event, despite the fact that his dad was extremely healthy and was a big exerciser. For a guy 73 years old, he was in perfect health, according to Dr. Malhotra, and he up and died of a cardiac event shortly after getting a series of these mRNA jabs. And so that's what led him to start looking under those rocks for centipedes. And it seems that the same centipede is under every rock, and it's capitalism. We got to make more money this quarter than we did last quarter. Otherwise, the board of directors will be sure to eliminate us as the executive officer, CEO, whatever. And so, it does seem like there could be some issue with these mRNA jabs. I wonder what percentage of the population is willing to entertain that notion at this point. But it sure is interesting. Brian, what do you think about the COVID jabs?
Well, for one thing, just medications as a whole, aren't like the divine light of God. Just if you want, effect A, you just have to. It just kind of takes your energy from one thing and you're robbing Paul to pay Mary, basically, right?
Yeah, robbing Peter to pay Paul.
It's not like some divine healing effect, and so, but I don't know. Is it controversial still to say that the jab doesn't seem like it was very effective? It seems like what it did is it prevented the spread of the virus for a little while, then it stopped being efficacious.
Did it prevent the spread of the virus? I mean, I'm not sure. Does it? I feel like the fact that it prevents transmission is totally debunked. I don't even think the establishment pretends that it affects transmission at this point, just that you might get less severe symptoms, right? Isn't that where we're at from the establishment perspective?
Well, I thought they did a lot of, they had the mandatory vaccines in Israel and a lot of numbers there, and then basically it seemed like it would work for a few months and then it would stop working.
Well, now I wish I could remember, because Dr. Malhotra addressed that specifically on the diaries. Well, all we can do is encourage our listeners to go out and do a spot of their own research, which I guess was frowned upon during the COVID era. God forbid anyone should do any reading. But check it out and see what you think of Dr. Malhotra. It makes me think of RFK Jr., who is running on a platform of litigating some of the excesses of the bizarre COVID era. And I do think that that there are major corporate influences that want to make sure that RFK never gets his shot at the White House for that reason, because a lot of these guys, I think, are guilty of promoting some of these medicines not as trade-offs but as miracle cures, and so that really is interesting, and that I suppose leads us into the political moment that we're in right now, where we've got what's happened since we were last on the pod is that the Democratic wagons have circled around the vice president, and it looks like they're going to try to push her as the nominee. Now, I feel like this probably is, like, they could definitely replace her. I don't think it's a foregone conclusion at this point. But that's the narrative we've currently got going on, Brian. What do you make of the political shenanigans going on now, the last week in July of 2024?
Well, I feel like the temperature has kind of been turned down on the crazy boiling political pot, because they're no longer trying to cram this crazy geriatric guy who's obviously dying down our throats. And so, I mean, it was a little unclear for a bit if, like, Kamala was going to carry the torch or not, but it seems like she has the endorsement from Obama and all the other, DNC establishment. And it doesn't seem like anyone else wants to run against the Donald.
Yeah.
So, no doubt I think it is going to be Kamala. Well, it's just a little crazy because, like, there hasn't been any paradigm-shifting political event this week in particular.
I feel denied. Yeah, I'm like, what? I just feel so unsatisfied. There's been no shocking political developments at all.
I think the effect of this crazy failed assassination attempt on the Donald is it's really just going to turn down the boiling pot because, well, it's ousted Biden, and now we can't go around, having like Orange Hiller on the front of the New Republic anymore, right? They're not going to do that. And so I think it's actually probably like a really good thing, and we can just go back to like ignoring politics.
Yeah, that's what I prophesy too. I think that I think the election season will now settle down and will be a lot more boring. And there'll be, I'm sure, incandescent debate about whether, figure A, whether red tie or blue tie, should be the one to get into the Oval Office. But I think that the corporate America, the donor class, is now back to the strategy of betting on both. Like, the kerfuffle was because the strategy for years has been the corporations put their donations behind both ponies. That way they win no matter who wins the horse race. But they withdrew. But Biden finally got so bad that everyone found out that the man was senile beyond comprehension. And so the donor class withdrew their support from Biden. And so there's a big kerfuffle about what we're going to do about that. But I tend to agree with you, Brian. I think that the picture of the Donald, with the blood on his face and the fist in the air and the flag behind him is just unbeatable. I think this election's got to go to the Donald. Kamala is a terrible politicker. Barack Obama is a corrupt politician, but he's a really good politician in the sense that he's an impressive person and he can give a great speech and he's able to think of things to say off the cuff. He gives a great interview. And Kamala is none of those things. She was so unimpressive in the 2020 Democratic primary that obviously she didn't make it out of Iowa. She dropped out before Iowa with less than 1% of the vote and couldn't even muster a single delegate in the 2020 primary race. So that's the reality of who the Dems are running here. I think they're just going to let her run against the Donald and lose. And then the Gavin Newsoms and the Gretchen Whitmers, and we'll shoot their shot in 2028. What do you reckon?
Well, I think it'll be more interesting when the Donald is, actually engaging with Kamala, and maybe there's like a debate or something. But to sort of your earlier point, I think that RFK's poll numbers are like plummeting because just not having the crazy dynamic of the Donald versus the corpse, I think is bad news for people like actively like trying to have a non-establishment candidate, right?
Yeah, the establishment has regained control. Yeah,
basically. And I don't think the establishment was ever really like against the Donald. I mean, he had like the backing of Wall Street in 2016, and the crazy CARES Act is like the greatest transfer of wealth like in history, and that was under the Donald, right? And,
but in 2020, no, wasn't the CARES Act? Yeah, that was 2020.
Yeah, it was signed by the Donald. I just looked this up.
Yeah,
and so I guess we can all breathe a little bit easier that they're gonna like turn down the temperature, and I think politics is just probably gonna be more boring going forwards, and so it's probably good news if you're like a regular Joe. But bad news if you want the system to be overthrown.
Well, there's another viewpoint here, and that's that the assassination attempt on Donald was not just some 20-year-old who had imbibed one too many stories about how the Donald was the second coming of Hitler, and was actually part of a broader deep state design to eliminate the Donald and replace him with a conventional Republican candidate. I don't know. I just don't really. There are a lot of weird things about the assassination, but there's always weird things about every event. Well, I guess I tend not to buy into that, barring more evidence coming out.
Well, so the kid had like a rangefinder and had taken a drone and surveyed the area ahead of time, and I guess it would be unlikely that the plan was for somehow the kid to shoot the Donald in the ear rather than blow his head off, and thus turn down the temperature on politics and shut out
down the temperature. Wait, if the assassination attempt had been successful, that was certainly not turned down.
What I'm suggesting is maybe it was staged exactly the way it happened.
That's a tough one, man.
I don't know why this kid would sacrifice himself for this cause, or maybe he's somehow a patsy. And maybe he got used somehow to do this crazy thing. Although I don't know how you set up to shoot the Donald in the ear. Although I guess the Donald's been seen and his ear looks fine. Yeah. I need to have a close look at a picture. But that'd be a pretty wild conspiracy. But on the other hand, just the politics are just so boring now, and there's no energy to overthrow the system, is how I feel. Yeah,
I think I got to put my money on one too many Orange Hitler memes, and now this kid thinks he's going to be a hero, but he's really confused. The kid's 20. I mean, I'm still confused at age 40. I was really confused at age 20. So yeah, I think that's got to be. If I was going to bet my money, I think it's just when you flood the airwaves with the announcement that the next Hitler is about to take power, eventually someone's going to take that. Some poor fool is going to take that seriously, and they're not going to realize that the whole idea of raising the specter of Orange Hitler is to cover up for the fact that the Dems have totally betrayed the working middle class, and they are taking money from corporate donors, just like the Republicans, and they are willing to preside over the dissolution of the middle class. And do nothing to stop it because they're being paid to do nothing to stop it.
But it doesn't really explain the insane lapses in security. And I mean, it doesn't seem like our establishment really wanted the Donald to get shot. Or it just seems like turning the temperature down is so much better for the establishment versus stirring up insane chaos.
Yeah.
Or maybe just this happens, and now the people in charge realize it's just gone too far. This was somehow a wake-up bell or something.
Yeah. Well, I'm willing to believe the Secret Service is just utterly incompetent. That seems like not that hard to believe. I mean, that these people just haven't really... I mean, you just have seconds to react, and I can just see where they would just... I guess people were trying to explain to them that there's someone on the roof with a rifle for minutes, maybe even hours before the event.
That's completely insane.
Yeah, but I can believe that Secret Service, they didn't show up to the morning briefing. They didn't have it. They weren't on the same radio communications as local law enforcement. I mean, it just seems like they might have just been totally lulled. Just having no incidents for so long might have just lulled them into a false sense of security, and then they got exposed.
It's just, one of our friends, I think, was saying they saw George Bush came to the Auburn High School back the 2000s, and they weren't allowed to bring in pens because they couldn't detonate a bomb or something. And there's just all kinds of stories about any times if you go to a presidential thing and you someone was on the internet was saying how they went to stand on a trash can to get a better view, and they instantly got tackled by 3 agents. And the insane lapse of security is just insane, I guess. But
Well, you're comparing the security detail for the sitting president to an ex-president at this point. Now, even though he's running for re-election, I mean, how good is like Jimmy Carter's security detail, or George Bush in 2024, like George W. Like, what kind of security detail is he getting? Probably not confiscating people's pens or tackling people off trash cans for George W. Bush anymore, right?
Well, I just don't. I think the corporate, like Wall Street's like always been behind the Donald, and he's always been good for, the establishment basically.
Has Wall Street been behind the Donald? I think that the Donald was an unknown quantity to the establishment in 2016. Like he won, even though he won even though it was not the plan of the deep state to have him win, which I think it's just about control. But I know that Donald probably enjoyed plenty of political donations in 2016, but I feel like what is the level of, do you happen to know, since you seem sure that the Donald received corporate money or Wall Street money in 2016, do you know what the ratio of Wall Street money going to the Donald versus going to Hillary was? Because I do know that the Donald was running on a fraction of the political budget that Hillary had in that race, but now in 2024, that's completely different. And now it's
I don't really know the specifics, but I mean, he was like with Jared Kushner. I mean, that's like an establishment dude, right?
Kushner is his son-in-law, though. So yeah, Kushner's married to Ivanka, so that's a little bit different. So I'm just wondering if you happen to know the specifics. Maybe not. I mean, it's a pretty arcane detail.
Well, it's just my feeling that he had the backing of Wall Street, but I guess I don't know the particulars. But he certainly didn't like let Wall Street down when he was. I don't know how you get to
certainly not. Well, he did. Yeah, all he did was lower taxes on the rich. That was it. That was all the man did in this first term. Again, the Donald has the worst policy, or no policies at all. But let me ask you this little question, Brian. If the vice president came out with a hard anti-Israel, pro-Gaza position, would you be tempted to cast a ballot for her?
I mean, I suppose.
Yeah, I think I would too. Like, that would be something that would make, like, that's the big disappointment with RFK. I mean, half of Democratic voters, according to multiple polls I've read, believe that what's going on in Gaza is a genocide. And I think most people have got to believe it's genocide adjacent. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of people. There are like 90,000 people eliminated. This is a significant percentage of the proportion of people. So the point is, like, I feel like that if the vice president, even if I didn't believe she would follow through on it, I still might be tempted to pull the lever. My whole thing is that I would really like for the Democrats to never be rewarded for the strategy of, instead of actually implementing working and middle class policies, just making a villain out of the red tie. Like that, we cannot allow that strategy to succeed going into the future if there's any hope of saving the middle class. And so I would really like the Dems to lose so long as they cleave to that strategy, but then I would imagine myself going back to the Dems once they actually start representing their constituency. And I feel like the Gaza thing would be a big part of that. Like, RFK could have been winning in the polls he could like win the election with a pro-Gaza position, but he refuses to take it. And so, I don't know. I think I would be tempted to go and vote for the vice president.
I don't think there's any chance that she comes in with some super pro-Gaza position.
Yeah, I mean, I think that she's receiving a lot of campaign contributions that are dependent upon her not doing that. That's my suspicion.
I mean, the Democrats are going to run like on abortion and DEI, right?
Yeah. I think I already made the comparison on this football, but abortion is like that aging quarterback. I think I used Joe Flacco as an example. You know, you give the quarterback a slap on the ass and send him back in, even though he's old and crusty and his ACL and MCL have been patched up multiple times. Get back in there, bring the aging quarterback Roe v. Wade, bring him back in for another round. We got to make sure that we have something to run on other than actually addressing the problem of the 99% versus the 1%, the diverging wealth inequality that's going to that is tearing the fabric of our society apart, and has been at least since the Occupy movement of 2010. But I still think I would throw all that logic to the wind and vote for the Kamala if she would just promise us, even if it turned out to be a lie, promise us that we're going to condemn the Israeli actions in Gaza and try to move to some kind of a ceasefire there. Anything to just save lives. I think I think I'd be tempted. I don't know. I mean, maybe that's losing sight of the prize, but that's kind of how I feel emotionally anyway.
Well, I guess I can imagine her paying some kind of lip service to this idea, but I'm sure that the status quo is not going to change.
Well, she got photographed with Netanyahu in his visit to Washington this week and came out with a strong condemnation of anti-Semitism.
Well, there you have it.
So yeah, it's not looking good. But I'm just saying, in that remote hypothetical, I think my emotions would have me pulling the blue lever again, just like I did every year up until 2016. I don't know. That's where I'm at on that.
Well, I guess that's it for politics this week. It's just a little boring, huh?
Yeah, no assassination attempts, no dropouts, no crazy scandal. I will say this: the comedy level is still elevated because you've got. It was funny to watch the media personalities, right? They won't think about, they don't seem to, I know they're getting their marching orders, but it's like they don't think about the fact that they have to go on the air next week and say things, and the week after that. And that if you make pronouncements, like, it's like, I'm always on this podcast, advocating for communism or for a psychedelic version of religion, or all the things, or for magic, all the most shameful ideas I like to advocate for in this podcast. It'd be funny if I came on here next week and was just advocating a Republican, like a hardcore, like capitalist position. Like, it would be weird if I did that and never segued at all. Just 1 week I was like hardcore in lefty politics, and the next week hardcore into right-wing politics, and there was no transition at all. Like, that would really confuse viewers. So it's interesting to hear people. It's interesting to hear the talking heads talk about how great Kamala is, but she's going to embarrass herself. She's a horrible candidate. Is why she finished in the last place in the 2020 primary. So if they indeed do replace Kamala with someone else, because she's just not going to be able to make this an interesting race that's going to hold people's attention and stop people from looking outside the two-party paradigm to RFK, it's going to be funny to watch them just correct, because 3 weeks ago today, they were calling us anyone who thought that Joe Biden's age was a problem wasn't ageist, and now they're saying, like, you can find a clip of Joy Reid on MSNBC talking about how there's only one old man in this race now, and boy, he sure can't seem to put a sentence together talking about the Donald. It's just, this was the woman that was, talking about how Biden is this Joe Scarborough saying, like, this is the best version of Biden, and F you if you disagree. I mean, it is just so funny to watch these clowns week after week trying to keep up with all these political developments and having to espouse firm but contradictory positions from one day to the next. So the comedy level is still there. So we can at least be thankful for that. And I think we'll be treated to much more comedy as done.
Well, seeing the ageism now turned on the Donald, especially like on Reddit and whatnot, is wild.
Oh God, yeah, it's priceless. It's too much.
I guess just another thing about Kamala is that, she's not going to have to have a debate with, get called out by Tulsi Gabbard. And we'll be lucky if there's, one debate between her and the Donald, probably. And I think she's just, going to not be in the limelight very much. And, unfortunately, the Democrats just haven't run a real primary since Obama, right? Versus Clinton.
Yeah, well, they're not about to do that again. Obama got all kinds of independent donations that outmatched Hillary's corporate funding. And so they had to rush Citizens United into the Supreme Court to make sure that they could that the corporations could give unlimited funds. They don't want any more the Democrats are all about preventing any kind of grassroots swell. So yeah, agreed. Yeah, they haven't run a real primary like you're saying.
Well, if you turn on the talking heads or whatever, I mean, the narrative is that this is the most important election ever, and the Democrats are saying that you have to vote Democrat to vote for democracy, although they're just not democratic at all. But I am just back to political apathy. Apathy. It's just going to not matter. Yeah. I'm very sure. Yeah,
it might be the best generally speaking, it might be best just to turn off the talking heads and not even bother voting and just, try to enjoy your life. That probably is the healthiest, but I do think that the comedy that we're being treated to is special. I just want to watch these court jesters ply their trade. But I think you're right. Probably political apathy has got to be. That's probably there's a sound argument to be made for political apathy. That's for sure.
The flip flopping on the ageism is you can see through it like grandma's underpants.
It's so bad. It's so bad.
Yeah, I just don't know how they're gonna just that feeling of the water boiling over. I don't know how they're going to get that back, because that was like driving me crazy. And especially, in the immediate aftermath of Donald getting shot, it was really like a peak thing. And I watched like hours of YouTube. But now, now it's cooled off. And well, for a minute there, I felt like I needed like a lobotomy, right? But now, I just feel like normal. And so I don't know how they're going to like, what they're going to do to get me like out of my mind again, and losing control.
Well, I have a suggestion for you. I just forecast a relatively calm election season for the duration, but there is one major surprise waiting for us, lurking in the wings, and that's that the levels of bad debt are piling up on bank balance sheets. Default rates are creeping up for every category of debt out there. We are hurtling towards a collision with our fractional reserve lending debt-based monetary system that mathematically can't propagate itself into the future indefinitely. So maybe that could boil over between now and November, and we could have another 2008 situation. Remember, the 2008 election was crazy. Like, Wall Street was melting down. The Secretary of Treasury, Hank Paulson, was on his knees on the floor of Congress, begging for bailouts for his buddies on Wall Street. And so we could get something like that is in our very near future. But I suspect that they probably would want to try to put that off as long as at least kick the can past the November election. But they may. It does feel like the situation is out of control. The talking heads, the media, the propaganda machine is projecting this air of calm right now that you're reflecting. But really, they're in scramble mode, right? The situation's completely out of control, and they don't have. I really think that they are minuscule in compared to the magnitude of the situation we're facing, that they are powerless in the face of the situation that we're facing. So a wild card could be economic troubles. That could really, even without considering the vagaries of a fractional reserve lending system or a debt-based currency, just the fact that houses are inflated beyond the ability of an entire generation now to get at them that pent-up frustration is going to have major political ramifications. It already did in the post-2008 era. That's why we got the Donald in 2016. But boy, the Zoomers and half the millennials who don't have houses, they're going to be steamed when they can't get access to houses. Now, I think that the price of housing reflects the presence of a massive apparatus of credit, but when that apparatus of credit collapses, the price of housing will collapse also. But until we have the economic collapse, the pot's just going to, like you say, the temperature is that the more asset prices inflate, the more the temperature is going to be turned up in the pot, and the frog is not going to be able to ignore the boiling water like in any way, shape, or form with each passing month here. So that's a factor.
Maybe the people in charge will do something to just try to prolong the homeostasis rather than like actively throw more coals on the fire.
That was the 2008 strategy. Yes.
Well, suppose like Kamala comes in there and like maybe sort of says the truth about the situation in Gaza, or something like that, or maybe they do something to help with like the crazy homeless problem, or the crazy, like, maybe we don't have like the biggest upward transfer of like wealth in human history, like another one in the next couple of years here,
Well, the thing is, only an upward transfer of wealth will preserve the stability of the system. I think it's just because that's how it's worked. The system is predicated on these upward transfers of wealth.
Maybe they make some kind of deal and be like, well, we kind of got to throw some kind of bone to, the middle and lower class.
Yes, that is the breaking point. Yes, I would love that.
FDR did it, right?
Yes. Yeah, FDR did it and wrote in his diary he was doing it to prevent a Russian Revolution, a la 1917, from happening here in America.
We've been on the brink before and reached some kind of stability, although... with FDR, it was like post-World War II stability, and that like ushered in this whole crazy like military-industrial complex in this Cold War era and whatnot. So,
yeah, the rich people, they never forgot the insult of the Great Depression. They had to agree to fund they had to agree to give some money back to the lower and middle classes because they got caught trying to do a fascist coup in the business plot, of course, and they approached 4-star Marine Corps General Smedley Butler, the wrong man. He blew the whistle on the whole thing, and FDR called all these people into a meeting and said, so you're going to have to you're going to have to pay for the New Deal. You're going to have to support the amendment to pay for the New Deal, the bill to pay for the New Deal, or y'all are getting tried for treason. But they never forgot that. And so starting in the late 60s and early 70s, they started unwinding all of that. And that's what brought us Reagan, and that's what brought us the destruction of the labor unions as they shipped all of our jobs overseas and made a concerted effort to get women into the workplace, to drive up the supply of labor and drive down the price of labor. And the way that we to keep the system running, we have used it's like the water cycle, right? You have like water evaporates over the ocean, floats over the mountains like clouds, falls as rain on the mountains, eventually forming bubbling mountain brooks, and those coagulate into or merge into rivers, and rivers merge into lakes, and lakes merge into the sea, where the water cycle begins afresh, right? The economy is a cycle, and you have to reseed the money. Like if the ocean is like the ultra wealthy, I mean, the lakes are like millionaires and the ocean's like billionaires, and we, the poor people, are the bubbling mountain brooks, and they just manually move the New Deal in the aftermath of the Great Depression moved money from where it's pooling up in the ocean, moved it back over to the mountains where it could run through the whole cycle again. But instead of doing that in the 70s and 80s, as labor unions were dismantled and worker productivity kept up increasing apace, but wages stagnated, in order to get people to buy the products that all the workers are producing. They have to get the same workers that make the products have to buy the products, and the people that own the factories are the middlemen. And in order to keep that cycle running, we went into debt, right? The 80s saw the rise of credit cards. We borrowed money. In other words, the mountains are borrowing water from the ocean, but we have to eventually repay them even more than we borrowed. And you can just only kick that can down the road so far. Before either, you have to have forgiveness or foreclosure, the great dichotomy of civilization and of debt in general. And obviously, in 2008, we chose foreclosure. I looked up the numbers recently. It would have cost 1/10 as much to just pay off everyone's mortgage or write down those mortgages, the actual ability of borrowers to pay, than it cost in the $8 trillion. It would have cost about $800 billion to just pay all the mortgages. But instead, we spent $8 trillion in quantitative easing. That's not the TARP bailouts. This is just our Federal Reserve buying bad debt off these banks. And we did that because the mortgages have all these mortgage-backed securities and credit default swaps attached to them. You know, they're unrelated. They're bets on the outcome of the mortgage. But if you allow the mortgages not to be paid, then that causes all these problems on Wall Street. So we spent 10 times as much to bail out Wall Street and just let Wall Street foreclose. You know, said another way, foreclosure becomes a lever by which creditors can enrich themselves at debtors' expenses when business cycles unwind and debts turn out to be unpayable. So, yeah, it's wild. I think I can't remember what got me on this tangent, but I do know that eventually, keeping the system running by borrowing money from. The thing that makes the system unstable is that the rich end up with too much money. And so borrowing money from the rich at interest to keep the system going in the near term creates creates the necessity of a long-term catastrophe. And that really was 2008. And so now we're just waiting for the inevitable sovereign debt crisis that's lurking and coming for us all. That all could really get the pot boiling again, as you mentioned earlier, and really lead to that sense of insanity, or that sense of reeling, or that sense of needing a lobotomy, as you mentioned. So maybe that will get the Democrats back to the point where they can actually take a little bit of cash, as you said, and just throw us a freaking bone for once, and not just have it be win after win after win for the tiny minority of us who have all the wealth. So, yeah. Well, what does that make you think of, Brian?
Well, maybe, I guess I'm just hopeful that maybe they'll just do that anyway without everything having to go crazy. And I was saying that, you know, the assassination was staged just the way it happened to result in this cooling effect. But maybe it just means that, like, divine intervention is real. And it's not because, like, God, like, cares about the Donald, But it's just that if the Donald had been shot, it would really be ushering in like a crazy era of darkness.
Do you dare to suggest, Brian, on the System Failure podcast of all places, that the assassination attempt on Donald could be a Jungian synchronicity event?
Something like that.
Very interesting.
That's not exactly what I was going to say, but maybe, just we really are in the Matrix, and or there's just it's like the GTA example that we were talking about before.
Yeah.
And we really would have been suffering, I think, if the Donald guy's head blown off.
That would have been an insane situation. We should all be thankful that didn't transpire. Yeah.
Well, on the subject of divine intervention, I don't know. Should we argue about the mushrooms?
Yes. This will be good. I would like to know, Brian, what do you think, and what do you think is the significance of magic mushrooms if we are in fact living in some kind of a simulation or a matrix scenario, or a reality of our collective manufacture? What are the significance of the magic mushrooms to that?
Well, the magic mushrooms definitely, you go through some kind of ego death and you get some kind of perspective on your life that you didn't have before. But I think that doing the mushrooms isn't really a solution in of themselves. I was watching a film review for The Matrix 4 recently, and they also talked a lot about the Matrixes, 1, 2, and 3. And so I think the Matrix 1, right, is like doing the mushrooms, right? You have this awakening and you realize that you are the one or whatever, and then the movie just kind of ends, right? And then so in the Matrix 2 and 3 is kind of struggling with these ramifications of what that all means. And then it turns out that Zion has been built and destroyed 7 times, and it's this whole crazy thing. And Neo ultimately has to sacrifice himself, and with a bunch of Christ-like imagery and whatnot. And so, just going through some kind of awakening is really just a small part of the story, right? And so, the real struggle is in the Matrixes 2 and 3, and by the end, Neo's had his eyes gouged out or something, and Zion's been blown up, and he has to strike some crazy deal with the architect or whatever to save Zion and with the machines, and that part's a little esoteric and hard to relate to, but just you have this awakening on the mushrooms, but the whole actual, that's just awakening your mind to another dimension or another level or whatever, but that's just brings on a whole new set of problems, kind of, which maybe isn't bad, but just to say that doing the mushrooms is a solution in of themselves is you're just awakening yourself to a new realm of problems and possibilities and whatnot, right?
Yeah, I agree. The mushrooms are really, taking mushrooms really is an act of perception. That's why Aldous Huxley called his book about psychedelics The Doors of Perception. By the way, we all know the story about Aldous Huxley doing LSD on his deathbed. Man, that guy, talk about having the courage of your convictions. And he was dying, and his wife was okay, well, how's it going? He's and he made the signal for even to double the dose on the final moments of his life. That was a man who really had some balls. It's an act of perception, as Mr. Huxley noted so effectively. So would you agree that maybe doing the mushrooms is the analog the analog of doing the mushrooms? An analog of doing the mushrooms might be looking up your map on Google Maps before you go on your trip, before you go on your voyage. It shows you the way, but you still have to actually prosecute the journey. Satisfying and all-encompassing simile, or is it deficient in some way?
Well, the thing is a map is it's relatively easy. You just take, you go this way for a while and then bang a right at Albuquerque. And so it'd be more becoming aware that you could just go on your phone and look up the directions to where you're going when you had no idea that was a possibility before. Yeah. And now you've it's becoming aware of the option of having a cell phone. Yeah. And now that you have all this you could be going on Reddit in the P-Hub for hours and hours each day, whereas before you were kind of in a state of nature running around and hunting buffalo, And so now, because you spent hours on Reddit, you've got like terrible back pain and anxiety from having terrible posture and whatnot.
Yeah. Okay. So the mushrooms don't like guarantee a safe voyage or success in any way, shape, or form. But knowing what to do when you get to Albuquerque, knowing which way to turn is a matter of perception. It's a matter of comprehension and understanding. And is that half the battle? Is that 3/4 of the battle? Is it 95% of the battle? It's a lot in my estimation.
I mean, I think to take the mushrooms is to like die and be reborn, right? Yeah. And so, it is what it is, that's for sure. And so, like, what do you gain from dying and being reborn? Well, you do gain perspective. So, maybe doing mushrooms is like climbing a mountain, so you get a better view of your surroundings. And I guess, a map, I suppose, isn't too far off.
Yeah.
I guess a map gives you some kind of perspective on what you're doing. So I guess, it's fair enough in some ways. A map just makes it sound so easy, I guess. It's the part that I disagree with.
Well, yeah, you can, plotting out your trip on Google Maps, it looks all nice and well and good on your screen, but man, you'll be in that car for a long time, and unexpected things will happen that you'll have to overcome, But like I say, knowing which way to turn when you get to Albuquerque, huge, right? It's a critical part of any journey is a sense of perspective. Like, what is it that we're aiming towards here?
See, I guess the part that I disagree with there is that, like, knowing which way to turn to Albuquerque, I feel like the mushrooms really don't do that. They don't really, like, when you get to Albuquerque, you'll have, like, some broader perspective, but, like, knowing what to do... the mushrooms like raise like a lot more questions than maybe they answer, right? Is the thing. And so like maybe you'd have we used to just be like atheists, right? But yeah, we're just gonna die and that's it.
Yeah, that's what the priests of our current religion preach, that we are just minds moving around inside a vast universe. Like you're saying.
And so now it's this whole complicated thing. We have some crazy idea about spirituality and what it all means, and ideas about if we're in the Matrix and whatnot, and so forth. But anyway, the mushrooms like raise questions, right? They don't like. I don't know how many answers they bring you, but it is like a perspective switch, right? Now that's probably what a new perspective does. It doesn't. Well, I don't know. I guess in some ways it sheds light on what you're doing, but it just also raises a lot of questions.
Yeah. It is kind of like the Hydra in that way, but if you just merely accept as gospel the notion that time and the temporal dimension and a physical dimension are one and the same, that is to say that sitting in a concert hall and hearing the symphony, and then the analog, you can transform the time signature into a physical dimension by just looking at the sheet music, right? You can see the entire symphony on one page if you had a big enough page. You could see the entire symphony at once versus having to experience it note by note. So once you come to the conclusion that, this 4D reality is a narrow slice of a larger reality, well, it helps you navigate the 4D reality better. But now the questions to which you refer are what else is going on in these other dimensions then? What else? I now see that there's a vast unexplored territory beyond this experience and this reality. And so that raises a bunch of questions. But you behold within the confines of this reality, you behold the whole thing with a much greater understanding. So within the 4D matrix, I think it answers more questions than it raises. But it raises all these other questions like, okay, so what's going on outside the flickering circumference of our campfire here in the dark wilderness? Like, what's going on out there? So yes, it does raise more questions than it answers, but those questions are not necessarily about which way to turn when you get to Albuquerque. Those questions are like, what is going on out in space? What's going on Saturn and Jupiter? I
think that probably what the mushrooms do for you, like more like the brass tacks, is you just kind of have, like, I think a heightened awareness of like what you're doing. I think you notice what you're doing more. Just like, it's this thing about realization, which we've talked about before. But you're like realizing what's going on, right? And we can only there's all this information coming in, and you can only like parse so much of it. And so, we're like manufacturing this reality that we're living in, and you just become more aware like what your part is in creating and experiencing this universe, right? That's like what the mushrooms do for you.
Yeah.
So
it definitely raises your consciousness, like you're saying. Now that raises your awareness. You have a higher awareness of the known territory, but you're also you're aware that there's much more unknown territory than you ever could have imagined. And that's really, that's what my experience has been like with them at any rate. But go ahead.
Well, the mystical part of the mushrooms for sure is the part where I guess to realize that you play a role in the universe that you're creating, right?
Yeah.
And I guess that's where all like the mysticism comes from.
There's a whole genealogy of Plato, Neoplatonism, Gnosticism, Hermeticism, Renaissance magic, alchemy, right? Rosicrucianism. There's a whole genealogy of underground movements that have affirmed this truth all throughout history. It's not something that is new. It's something that people understood a long time ago, because mushrooms aren't some advanced technology. Well, maybe they are advanced technology, but they're not new to the human species. Cicero called the goings on at Eleusis the most important things. The Roman statesman and orator Cicero, who was involved in the conspiracy to assassinate Caesar, said that the most important thing Athens ever gave us is the Eleusinian mysteries. This Roman civilization was like a copy of Greek civilization. Their philosophy, their theology, their gods, everything that they had came from Athens. So it's crazy that he would rank Eleusis as being the most important. And that the church that took over the Roman Empire in the 3rd and 4th centuries didn't want people thinking that at all. And so you have to really do a deep dive to find out that Cicero said this. But it's true.
Well, and it's like it's a complicated thing, because it is like what you give your attention to, you kind of give your power or give your life to or give energy to. And it's not just like, you get what you want or whatever, but like what your attention though does have like gives things power, right? And
it gives things. Well, if Plato's to be believed, it gives existence to reality itself. Not just power, but like that's the act of what you pay attention to. That's the act of creation itself. And by the way, double slit experiments are giving some serious hard data to that notion here in the here and now.
Yeah, well, the things that you observe are the things that are real, and that's really like ultimately like what's real, right?
Yeah.
And it's not like just like any like object in front of you isn't like real until you really like conceive of it and notice it and bask in its existence or whatever.
Yeah, so I could ask you what color the chairs were in the restaurant you were in last night. You'll have no idea, because they're not fixed as objects in your mental map of reality. Now, presumably there are chairs and they do have a color, but they're not a part of the reality which you're experiencing. And we all work that way. That's really interesting. Yeah. All right. Well, yeah. Let's draw the line there, Brian. And at this point in the pod, I always encourage our venerable listeners to head on over to nop.substack.com for some exciting essays. And you can send us an email and let us know what you think of our crackpot ravings. We'd love to hear from you. We'll surely read it on the air if you send us a note, and you can reach us at nop@substack.com. Of course, that nop has a silent K at the beginning, so it's KNOPP at substack.com. And by the way, we do have a small announcement. We're going to go to we're going to start putting out a little quickie for you all in addition to this main pod. So there'll be 2 pods a week. It'll be really short, and it will be my voice with my sibilant S's and my somewhat nasally little drone here reading the essays of the week. So y'all can look forward to receiving that. So keep a weather eye out. We'll have it out for you soon.
I can't hardly wait.
All right. So long, everyone.
Bye.